I'm Roy Lee Lindsay with the North Carolina Pork Council, and I want everyone to remember bacon makes everything better.
Welcome back into Timeout, the Tobacco Road Basketball Show, each week here on the North Carolina Sports Network. I am Mike Waddell. He is David Glenn, and joining us always is the coach, Kerry Keating. Timeout brought to you each week by the North Carolina Pork Council. North Carolina pig farmers aren't just feeding your bacon obsession, they're fueling our economy too. The pork industry pumps more than $10 billion a year into our state's economy, supporting jobs and rural communities. NC Pork, good for the plate, great for the state. And coming up in less now than 2 weeks, our annual basketball extravaganza, the contest of contests, bacon and basketball, brought to you by North Carolina Pork. And we also have the North Carolina High School Athletic Association's Basketball Championships, March 14th and 15th at the Lawrence Joel Veterans Memorial Coliseum. Follow all of the action of the North Carolina High School Basketball Championships online at nchsaa.org. Gentlemen, let's get right into our weekend update. Bubbles were bursting all around the Atlantic Coast Conference for Wake Forest, SMU, and also Pitt. State and Carolina got wins, and Duke put on a clinic in Gotham, DG. This was one heck of a performance by the Blue Devils, but State and Carolina doing their best to remain relevant.
Yeah, Mike, it's great to be with you and Coach Keating as always. The ACC's highlight was a no doubt about it. Number 3 Duke not only beat Illinois at Madison Square Garden in that type of setting that is more like the NCAA tournament that the Blue Devils, of course, are looking forward to. They absolutely annihilated the Illini, who, remember, are right on the edge of being a top 25 team nationally. So maybe the type of team you could end up facing maybe in the Sweet 16 or even the Elite 8. Duke has lost only 1 game since the month of November at this point. So they'll be the favorite when we all get together in Charlotte at the ACC tournament. They'll be one of the favorites at the NCAA tournament. And elsewhere in the league, you're right, man, more bad news than good for the ACC bubble. Carolina did hold serve by winning those home games against State and Virginia. But Wake hurts itself by losing at NC State. SMU hurts itself by whiffing against Clemson, the Mustangs' last regular season chance for a high-impact victory. And then Pitt goes and loses at Notre Dame. So several teams on that ACC bubble are sliding. We'll see where the heels go from here, but it's really Duke, Clemson, and Louisville, and then everybody else kind of biting their fingernails right now.
And when you talk about February, guys, we always said you can't get to March without February. The most important thing in February is to be winning games. That's exactly what the teams here locally are doing. It's a little bit dicey. We have teams, obviously, in state trying to just fight their way into the ACC tournament potentially. But in the case of, obviously, Carolina, Wake Forest, can they get into the NCAA tournament? The only thing that you can really control is if you're winning or lose the games. Whatever comes around outside of that, you really have to do your very, very best to just shut out all the noise. And in the case of these teams winning these games, it bodes well heading into the future. In the stretch run here, you know, the old adage of your last 10 games, just keep taking one at a time right now. The last 10 will add themselves up, and you usually find yourself where you need to be. It'll be interesting to see how the schedule, as it presents itself for each of these teams, plays out. Somewhat favorable for all of them. State to get into the tournament, ACC tournament, and obviously with Wake and Carolina fighting to still take one of those bids away, albeit maybe from one of their own brethren at SMU to get into the NCAA tournament. So an interesting time coming up, a fun time to be an ACC basketball fan for sure.
This segment brought to you by our great friends at Atlantic Tire and Service, where DG and his family take all of their vehicles for routine maintenance, service needs, and a world-class selection of new tires. Atlantic Tire and Service, your one-stop tire and auto repair provider with highly trained technicians and a sales and support staff that are second to none. They've grown to 6 Triangle area locations, 2 in Raleigh, 2 in Cary, 1 in Durham, and 1 in Wake Forest. You can learn more online at AtlanticTireOnline.com.
This week's big things are brought to you by Atlantic Tire and Service. And David Glenn, back in the day, they had a tournament here in North Carolina in the early part of the college basketball season called the Big Four: Duke, Carolina, NC State, and Wake. But this year, you have a different type of Big Four, and that's these fabulous freshmen in the league.
Yeah, Mike, my one big thing this week does revolve around what I call the freshman learning curve that Coach Keating, I'm sure, has seen with his players over the years. Not all of them, but the ones who can be a lot better in March than they were in November and December, even if they're not your best player, can matter a lot. And I think here in our backyard, when I first started tackling this topic, I didn't realize that not only would I end up talking about the Blue Devils, the Tar Heels, the Wolfpack, and the Demon Deacons, but all four of these examples happen to be, by chance, homegrown guys, meaning guys who played their high school basketball right here in what you love to call the bold North State. The current era of college basketball, and I'm going to get to Isaiah Evans of Duke, Drake Powell of Carolina, Juke Harris, one of Coach Keating's favorites from Wake Forest, and Paul McNeil of NC State, who just had his best game of his college career when the Wolfpack beat the Demon Deacons head-to-head. But I want to remind folks something that I've mentioned in the Cooper Flagg context. Cooper Flagg of Duke just recently turned 18 years old. The other top candidates for National Player of the Year, seriously, are 24 years old, 23 years old, and 22 years old. So there are guys 6 years older than Cooper Flagg who are his competition for National Player of the Year. I bring that up because freshmen are having less impact on major college basketball because the COVID year made college basketball players older. There's fifth-year seniors, sixth-year seniors. Obviously, name, image, likeness money has allowed some guys to stay in school longer than they might have, rather than maybe jumping to Europe or somewhere else for a pro career. They're staying in school and sometimes making seven figures as college basketball players. That obviously was not in play as recently as 4 or 5 years ago. But Isaiah Evans of Duke, Fayetteville, North Carolina, North Mecklenburg High School, right there near you, Mike, in the Charlotte area, McDonald's All-American. We all know the Blue Devils have a starting lineup that is championship caliber, right? Sion James, Tyrese Proctor, Con Knippel, Cooper Flagg, Common Malawach. But right now, they cannot be entirely confident at Duke about what they're going to get from their bench. Their best backup is that Syracuse transfer, Malik Brown. He's now injured for the second time this season, now with his shoulder problem. The Purdue transfer, Mason Gillis, he's okay, but he hasn't been great for the Devils. The sophomore guard, Caleb Foster, who was demoted from starting point guard earlier this year, he's okay. Some really good games, some you get little or nothing from him. The freshman big man, Patrick Gongba, only recently started to play significant minutes. To me, this is where Isaiah Evans, the true freshman, can play a huge role for the Blue Devils down the stretch. You're not going to see a true freshman play with any more confidence than Evans did against Illinois at Madison Square Garden. He had 17 points and hit 3 of his 5 3-point attempts. He also had 17, by the way, in the Devils' recent win at Virginia, which shows that he's a lot better lately than he was early this season. And he had 18 in his best game of the 2024 calendar year, back when Duke beat Auburn at Cameron Indoor Stadium. Isaiah Evans is a 6'6" sharpshooter who's going to end up in the NBA someday. He's hitting 46% of his three-pointers for the season. This is a guy who, if he stays at Duke, could be one of their superstars. All this team needs from him is valuable, consistent production off the bench. He's the kind of guy who could help you win around a 32 game, a Sweet 16 game, as all the defensive attention is on guys like Cooper Flagg and some of those other even better players. Isaiah Evans of Duke, remember how Grayson Allen on that national championship team at Duke in 2015 went from hardly playing at all to, wow, who's this guy in the Final Four helping Mike Krzyzewski win another NCAA title? Maybe Isaiah Evans can be that for Duke here down the stretch or at the ACC or NCAA tournaments. The theme continues with Drake Powell of North Carolina. He's from Northwood High School right there in Pittsboro near Chapel Hill, another former McDonald's All-American. To me, Drake Powell is any coach's dream. Plays hard, plays effectively at both ends of the floor. He's unselfish, he's low maintenance, and he's highly productive even without needing the ball in his hands all that much. Drake Powell has started roughly half of the Tar Heels games this season, and he was back in the starting lineup for Carolina's recent wins over NC State and Virginia. He has great hands. He doesn't turn the ball over much. He's an outstanding defender with that NBA caliber wingspan, especially outstanding defensively by freshman standards. He can rebound like a forward. He hits around 38% of his three-pointers. He has scored in double digits. It's 7 times this season, including a few lately. But he also helps the team statistically and the team's chemistry so much that I think he needs to be on the floor late in the season, roughly 30 minutes a game or more. Whether or not he's in the starting lineup doesn't matter to me as much. He's got to be on the floor because he makes the Tar Heels pieces fit together better in a way that has been a challenge for most of the season. Remember that Ian Jackson gets a lot more headlines in Chapel Hill as a fellow former McDonald's All-American. But remember that both Jackson and Powell are going to be NBA draft picks, maybe even first rounders, and their presence on this Carolina roster, to me, gives this year's Tar Heels an even higher ceiling than any of these other ACC bubble teams. Theme continues at Wake Forest, a guy that Coach Keating circled earlier this season, Juke Harris. Salisbury High School, again, a little north of where Mike Waddell is in the Charlotte area. Juke is not an under-the-radar guy. He's a 4-star prospect, top 100 nationally. He got his only start of this long regular season when the Deacons visited SMU recently in that really big game, and Juke Harris delivered 9 points, 2 rebounds, and assists, a steal, and other good plays as Wake beat the Mustangs in Dallas. Earlier this year, Juke Harris had 11 points in the Deacons' biggest victory of the year over the Michigan Wolverines. He had 17 in a home win against NC State. He had 14 and played well when the Deacs lost to Duke in that close game in Winston-Salem. We have talked a lot this season about Wake's talented cornerstones, Hunter Salas, Cam Hildreth, Trayvon Spillers, Efton Reed, all seniors. But those guys desperately need help from someone else on that roster to get off their precarious bubble status. And I think Juke Harris is the best candidate to deliver that help down the stretch for Steve Forbes and the Demon Deacons. Finally, at NC State, a guy named Paul McNeil. Fans might have not heard his name pretty much all season, unless you're a diehard Wolfpack fan. He is from Richmond Senior High School in Rockingham. Again, not too far from Mike Waddell in the Charlotte area. 4-star prospect, top 75 high school senior last year. Paul McNeil got his first and only start of the entire season when the Wolfpack hosted Wake Forest this past Saturday, and he may have been the best player in the game for either team in the Pac's 85-73 victory. McNeil had a season-high 24 points. He hit 4 of 7 three-pointers. He had 3 assists and 0 turnovers against what was a desperate and talented Wake Forest basketball team. This is a guy who had played 10 minutes or more in ACC games prior to that only 3 times all season, and who didn't play at all in some games earlier this year for the Wolfpack. So that was an enormous step in the right direction for Paul McNeil against a quality opponent as the Wolfpack's young guard tries to be another example of the right side of a freshman learning curve. In closing, these guys can keep getting better. They can be even better in March than they have been here in January and February. At Duke, Evans could be that off-the-bench player that lifts the Devils to a Final Four or an NCAA title. At Wake and Carolina, the continued improvement and reliability of Drake Powell and of Juke Harris could be the difference between making the NCAA tournament or falling just short and ending up in the NIT. And at State, it's a little different. But if the promise shown by Paul McNeil, sticking to the plan, staying with it in February, even though you were mostly ignored for the previous 3 months, if Kevin Keatts can duplicate that theme with some other young players on his roster, then Wolfpack Nation can feel better about that program, even in a year where obviously the record has been a really poor one so far.
Coach Kerry Keating, it was about a month ago on his weekly radio show where Tar Heels head coach Hubert Davis said that he was going to hire a general manager for the Carolina men's basketball program. That was a bigger announcement than just one position. I know you believe that.
Well, when you look at the results that have happened since that time, you tend to think that there was a lot more going on than just the hiring of a GM in Hubert's mind. Take the Georgia Tech win out from the early December. They went 4-1, 1-4, 4-1. 1-4 leading into that announcement, now 4-1 again since the announcement. And from the untrained eye, even the trained eye, a visibly different Carolina team. Now, there are some nuances into why maybe they're having a little bit more success in terms of how they're adjusting with their personnel and having these results. But I don't think it's any coincidence that, and we all know this, teams normally take on the personality, the cadence of the head coach. It's none more apparent than in the throes of the season when you really have to dig in and kind of establish yourself in January. We talked about the stress that we could see that Hubert was wearing. It kind of showed him maybe how the team was playing. And I think since that time, whether it's being adhered to or not behind the scenes as all of the red tape gets cut over in Chapel Hill, there's clearly been a relief in Hubert's sense that he knows this is going to happen. He wouldn't have come out and said that had it not been in place. And clearly he had to do some things before that, which quite possibly could have distracted him from actually doing his main job, which is coaching the team. This is one of the reasons why you need that, why you need a new structure in college basketball. So many other ancillary things to take care of as a head coach. The main thing comes September into April, you want to be able to do is coach your team. I think a weight has been lifted off Hubert's shoulders. When and if this happens, it clearly is showing in how they play. It's a noticeably different Carolina team. Now, albeit the schedule hasn't been as daunting as maybe it was in other stretches during the season. But as we just talked about to open up, what you have to do in February, you have to win games. The Heels are now kind of a little bit more secure above that bubble line, mostly because they are going 4-1. The schedule being favorable as they head into the last season showdown, as we always finish against Duke. But having that momentum, as we know and talked about, that Duke game, you can throw records out the window. If all of a sudden the Heels going to win 3 more games going into that Duke game, and obviously winning that game, being the last one, certainly cements and solidifies their place in the NCAA tournament. Even before that, though, they may find themselves with a lot less pressure on their shoulders and the result of that Duke game as a result of what's happened with Hubert. Hey, we're going to make this change. And you can just kind of feel everything kind of come off his shoulders. And it looks like that's been parallel in how the Heels are playing on the floor. It remains to be seen if actually this happens before the transfer portal opens up. Because let's be honest, guys, that can be a huge distraction. We just saw Duke potentially losing one of their top assistants, if not their top assistant, to go take on a fellow conference mate in Miami's head coaching job. The question I would ask down the road is, will he stay past the transfer portal? This is like the old football deal. Do you coach in the bowl game? Now we're going to have college basketball coaches. Do you coach to the end of the season? Because once that transfer portal opens up mid-March, so there's a lot of weighing factors in this. And I think in the case of Hubert, he'd like to have that in place so someone can adhere to that transfer portal while he's still coaching. You take that 100 times out of 100 to keep coaching, but you need to have someone who's taking care of that transfer portal for you right now. And obviously that'll be the first task for the GM that does get hired at North Carolina. So no coincidence. I don't think that there's a parallel, and we'll see if this continues on as the Heels try to solidify their position for March.
Topic number 1 of the week, brought to us by our friends at the Original Saltworks. Bob Hubbard and the best breakfast and lunch combo anywhere in North Carolina. It's right there in Wilmington. We encourage you to go down and dig in. And as you look at North Carolina basketball, they've been able to put together back-to-back wins over rival NC State and Virginia over the weekend after losing that Monday night contest to Clemson. And one of the common denominators in the Tar Heels play of late has been Elliot Cadeau seeing less minutes on the floor.
I think from a coaching standpoint, there's one easy way to rectify turnovers. You don't have a chance to turn it over. You know, that was the whole thing. Like it's the short leash that coaches can have for ball handlers. You have to have the ball to score. You know, I was watching the Warriors just as an example this weekend, and one thing that stood about Jimmy Butler coming to the Warriors, and the one thing you would think of all the things he could say is, we take care of the ball, we have a chance to make more shots. So they talk about it even at the very highest level with the most notable of superstars. It certainly applies to the highest level of college basketball too. This is something we've talked about ad nauseum all year. And maybe there is no coincidence, and not just the fact that Hubert realizes I have a weight lifted off my shoulders by someone taking care of the other things non-basketball related to the product on the floor and the results, but maybe now I need to make Elliot understand less time means less turnovers. Less turnovers means that we win. David did a great job explaining what's happening with Isaiah Evans. And I look at this parallel. This is where you earn your stripes as coaching staff, because the head coach obviously has to really dial into the focus of the end result. The coaching staff now has to help manage these players that have these high expectations and make them understand what's really important at the end. That winning is going to affect not just our team, but the individuals that affect the winning too. And for that matter, that don't affect the winning. I'll give a little bit of credit to the staff in this one, because someone has to be able, and maybe it's not just Hubert, to sit down and make Elliot understand these things. Look, we can score if we have the ball. We can't if we don't. Remember, we talked about, hey, you're better off closing your eyes and throwing it up. It may go in than turning it over. I don't think there's any coincidence in the fact that Carolina's having success on the floor. And it looks like they're more capable of having that success as an overall product in the fact that Elliot's minutes have been reduced. Now, I don't know if that can be sustained. Elliot's obviously an important player in what he's capable of doing as a rebounding guard, as a ball handler. The question now bemoans, can they translate into increasing his minutes and also keeping the turnovers down? That's going to be the key factor moving forward, because I'm not sure they can only play him 18 to 20 minutes a game. He needs to be in the 25 to 30, but he also needs to be in that 2-to-1 assist ratio, which he still quite hasn't gotten to yet. But I think you're spot on, Mike, here. Less Elliot Cadeau turnovers equals more North Carolina wins.
Yeah, Mike, I created the ACC Sports Journal back in the 1990s, and we, as a magazine and a website, there are a handful of features we did every single year. And one of them was called X Factor. And we asked a writer at each of the ACC schools to just pick a player who was good enough to be in the rotation, but not so good that you kind of knew what to expect on a night-to-night basis. And it was one of the most popular features we did every year. That's why we did it every single year. And I think the answer for the Tar Heels this year would be Elliot Cadeau, because he's the type of guy that when he plays really well, the Tar Heels are extremely difficult to beat. Even in a couple of the Tar Heels' losses this season, there was nothing wrong with the Elliot Cadeau who went to Wake Forest and nearly led the Tar Heels to a victory over the Demon Deacons. That was a 1-point game, and Cadeau had 14 points and 13 assists with only 3 turnovers. That's the Elliot Cadeau that the Tar Heels need, even though that was a loss for Carolina. But when the Heels went to Clemson, Elliot Cadeau was terrible. 6 turnovers against the Tigers. When he went to Duke, he was terrible. 5 turnovers with only 3 assists. You just can't win under those circumstances when a guy who has started every single game this year, and I don't think it's mere coincidence that Hubert Davis, while cutting Cadeau's minutes, has kept him in the starting lineup. I think it would be too big of a psychological blow for a guy that you think might need to play less to just, near the end of your sophomore season, take a 2-year starter and make him start coming off the bench. I think that would just mess with most young players' heads. So he's still starting every single game. But as Coach said, he's been trending toward 20 minutes a game after playing well over 30 a whole bunch of times earlier this season. Some things we know down the stretch are probably not going to change, right? Elliot Cadeau is only a 30% three-point shooter. That's probably not going to get dramatically better. It's kind of odd that a second-year starter with the ball in his hands so much, especially Coach mentioned someone on the Carolina staff spending a lot of time with Elliot Cadeau. How about Marcus Page? One of the highest IQ guards in the history of Carolina basketball. You know what he did? Worked his tail off on his three-point shot, and it got better. Worked his tail off on his free throw shooting, and it got better. Worked his tail off on his handling and passing skills, and really minimized those dumb turnovers. Also rarely got into foul trouble, Marcus Page. Elliot Cadeau is still trending toward, 67% from the free throw line, which is low for a guard, and 31% from three-point land, which is better than last year, but still low for a guard. But Elliot Cadeau, oddly, I mean, not only does he lead the ACC in turnovers by a mile, which he's a great assist man, which is great, but you can't lead the ACC in turnovers by a mile and lead your team to the NCAA tournament. He also gets in foul trouble all the time. I mean, he's an undersized guy. He's got to move his feet. He's guarding the ball a lot, but you can't. It's another thing that's going to go down, right? If your minutes go down, you're going to turn it over less. If your minutes go down, you're going to be less vulnerable to fouling out of a game, which he's had 4 or 5 fouls a bunch of times this year. That's not uncommon for a big man. That is uncommon for your starting point guard. So Elliot Cadeau needs to be smarter defensively by avoiding the unnecessary fouls. He's got to be more reliable with his free throw shooting. He needs to at least occasionally hit a 3, and that has gotten, again, a little bit better here lately. But with Elliot Cadeau at his best, Carolina is an NCAA tournament team, and I would argue they're a dangerous team at both the ACC tournament in Charlotte and in the Big Dance. When Elliot Cadeau plays as he did at Clemson, horrible. At Duke, horrible. Earlier this year at Louisville, he was not very good. It's really the totality of his game. He doesn't need to be a big scorer for the Tar Heels. He does need to be really responsible with the basketball. He does need to hit those clutch free throws. He does need to kind of set the tone of confidence and sort of predictability. None of those wild throws, Mike, that you were mentioning. You need to wear body armor in the lower seats at the Smith Center in case you catch an Elliot Cadeau pass in the nose that goes astray. His teammates need to know that he's more reliable. His coaches need to know that he's more reliable, as Marcus Page was for the Tar Heels to an incredible degree. If he gets back to those patterns, he'll play more. If he doesn't, he'll probably stay in the starting lineup, but he's going to be too erratic for the Tar Heels to get where they want to go.
Let's go to our second topic of the week, and it's brought to you by our newest partner here on the North Carolina Sports Network, North Carolina by Train. An absolutely fantastic way to tour and get to where you got to go here in the bold North State. North Carolina by Train, go connect. And let's talk about the Duke Blue Devils and their trip to Madison Square Garden. What a performance. And this on the heels of a big injury to the Blue Devils that a lot of the talking heads were out there saying, oh, what's going to happen to Duke? Malik Brown has hurt his shoulder. Will he be back this year? Can he return to help this team down the stretch? Well, it didn't look like they needed Malik Brown too darn much. Duke is just light years ahead of everybody in the ACC and now starting to prove that they can also have that type of overwhelming force against intersectional opponents.
Yeah, Mike, to me, the first 4 players at Duke are as good as it gets in all of college basketball. Cooper Flagg, Con Knippel, Tyrese Proctor, Sion James. Collectively, those guys hit about 80% of their free throws. Collectively, they hit about 40% of their three-pointers. They rebound well. They defend well. They play with a high basketball IQ. They play with confidence. They're comfortable with each other in terms of their chemistry. The 5th starter, Kamen Malawach, needs to come along a little bit, be a little bit more reliable, especially offensively. Fewer butterfinger plays in the post when they do throw it down low, but he even is already a very good shot blocker and rebounder. I think in the broader sense, as we toss bouquets to John Shire and more to Cooper Flagg, who's not only going to be the ACC Player of the Year, but I hope folks will check out my article about his candidacy for National Player of the Year that I recently wrote at our website, ncsportsnetwork.com. Con Knippel is reliable. Tyrese Proctor is reliable. Sion James is reliable. These guys are predictable. You kind of mostly know what you're going to get. The beyond tossing the bouquets, if we want to nitpick the Blue Devils or whisper into the ear of John Shire, it is really about the supporting cast. Because if it's all the top 4 guys, you're vulnerable to getting bitten either at the ACC tournament or the NCAA tournament. If you can develop a 6th and 7th and 8th man, that they don't have to be great, but they have to be predictable. They have to be reliable. They have to know what the coach wants from them and know what the coach does not want from them. What's a shot you should take? What's a shot you shouldn't take? What's a pass you should make? What's a pass you should not make? Know your personnel on defense, things of that sort. With Malik Brown injured as we speak and his status going forward a little bit uncertain, at least for now, and Caleb Foster being up and down, I think the topic that I called out earlier, Isaiah Evans, has a chance to be a super sixth man for the Blue Devils. But they also need Mason Gillis, Patrick Gongba, Malik Brown, if he does come back, is a very reliable player. But Caleb Foster, that supporting cast can be the difference between a special season at Duke, which they're going to have, and that extra special season, which at Duke, it's measured by national championships first. To get to that top of the mountain, it's got to be more than Cooper Flagg, Con Knippel, Tyrese Proctor, and Sion James. And that's where that supporting cast comes into play. There's still time for those guys to come along or get healthy or both. But if I'm John Shire, that's one of the few things that keeps me up a little bit at night, because most of his other ducks are already in a row in Durham.
Well, Coach Glenn, clearly we have this thing figured out. In the case of Wake Forest, it was get Juke Harris more involved. And we're going to bang the Isaiah Evans train here, obviously not just because of his last 2 games, but in the prior 7, he was only 4 for 7 from 3, and actually had a couple games where he didn't make one. All those 4 came in, and now he's in his last 2 gone, we're saying 8 for 11, and not even at home. And that's the most important thing. You don't play NCAA tournament games at home. And that, you're not going to play them, obviously, at Virginia, but you are going to play them, in, as you mentioned, in arenas like Madison Square Garden, where Duke went to go play Illinois. The one thing that I appreciate about Isaiah Evans after watching these last 2 games, and again, flowers to the coaches, because you can just tell this has been a mindset shift. It's hard to get a kid who's not a main scorer for you, who's not getting all the love, getting all the shots in the middle of the season, albeit February, and you know he's capable, to come around and say, okay, your time's coming. When you watch Isaiah Evans in the last 2 games, as soon as he crosses half court, and this is something for all of our viewers to watch in these Duke games, right away, it's almost like you've entered the zone. His hands are up. His hands are ready. He's 3 passes away. You can see he's actually sitting there because he knows when that ball comes to him, these other guys are getting so much attention. I'm going to be open. And the most open you are as a shooter is when you first catch the ball. And he clearly has made that shift. Now, whether this translates and continues on is not something any opponent of Duke wants to see, because we know what those top 4 are going to give you. But he will win them a game in the NCAA tournament. I don't know if it's going to be in the first round. It may not be in the second round, but it could very easily be in the Sweet 16 or the Elite 8 when teams have the roster in place and the defensive presence to take Knippel and Flagg, the size, the strength, take that away. They have the rebounding ability. This is something that I think that clearly has been a focus, because you don't all of a sudden just go and let alone take 8 threes, but take 11 threes, albeit, and make 8 if you're not prepared to do that. And I like to go back and maybe even focus even more before that and see what his mindset and his body language was. And was it like this? Was it like this? And I'd be willing to bet you in those 7 games, the majority of it wasn't like that. And it can't just be, oh, Malik is out, it's your time. This is a guy who's got, as David mentioned, pro potential. This is something that, again, we've been talking about this and been effusive with our praise for how John and his staff have handled the roster in place. Very, very difficult to do. This isn't an Auburn roster, average age of 23, 24 on their last leg. This is a very young roster, although I've sprinkled some transfers, some older guys in. It's a young roster with their eyes on the prize. You talked about Cooper Flagg. 6 years from now, Cooper Flagg is going to be 4 generations wealthy. 6 years from now. And those guys at Auburn right now, maybe a half a generation wealthy right now. Let's be honest, SEC's paying pretty well. But when you look at that discrepancy, a guy like Isaiah Evans falls right in the middle of that. That is an unbelievable quiver to have if you're shooting arrows in the NCAA tournament, to have a guy like Isaiah Evans who, 1, is capable, and 2, has accepted this role and understood how it affects winning. And at the end of the day, we talked about that. We talked about Elliot Cadeau in Carolina. If you can get these kids to understand that from an individual standpoint, moving forward into what's going to be a lucrative career, whether it's here, there, or somewhere else, because it can still be at Duke as well. Your value can go up when these guys are gone, whether it goes to the NBA this year or not. And we don't even know if that's the case. Winning affects the bottom line. When the guys that make decisions about paying you look at whose value is who. His value is rising because he's affecting winning. At some point, Cooper Flagg is going to have a bad game. I mean, he's superhuman, but he's not, totally immune from having a game where he scores single digits. When and if it happens is not going to be an issue for Jon Scheyer if he's got a guy like Isaiah Evans to pick up the slack from a shooting perspective. He clearly has that in spades with the other guys on the floor from a rebounding, passing. But as David's been saying all year, this also a guy that leads them in all 5 categories. Well, they have almost a guy in every category right behind Cooper Flagg to step up. From a shooting and scoring perspective, that guy may not be Isaiah Evans.
You know that Jon Scheyer has a loaded deck whenever he runs a 1590 SAT future tax lawyer out on the floor at Madison Square Garden and he rolls in a 3, because I don't know where he ranks on the ledger in terms of future generational wealth, but he's not going to make it on the basketball court. But that's how damn good Duke is this year. And the Illinois folks who are rolling back to Urbana-Champaign were very upset that their club didn't make more of a showing at Madison Square Garden over the weekend.
The Lawson Insurance Group in Raleigh is a family-owned business led by 3 actual brothers who happen to be huge sports fans: Ken Lawson, Miller Lawson, and Michael Lawson. I know these guys, I trust these guys, and I send these guys my own insurance business and that of my family. The next time you have insurance needs, I hope you'll do the same. The Lawson Insurance Group is known for its commitment to community and its dedication to ensuring that North Carolinians and their businesses are prepared for life's inevitable challenges, with the reminder that as a high street insurance partner, Lawson Insurance Group offers local expertise and support that, combined with High Street's extensive national resources, means more choice and support for you as their client. To learn more, search Lawson Insurance Group online. The Lawson Insurance website will be the first link that pops up.
On to topic number 3. And this is Kevin Keatts' time of year, at least it was a year ago, as the Wolfpack head coach led the red and white to the Final Four. Right now, NC State is trying to get into a different tournament, the ACC tournament, because only 15 of the 18 teams make it to Charlotte this year. Gentlemen, the Wolfpack have Miami, Pitt, Georgia Tech, and Syracuse in their remaining 4 games of the regular season over the next 2 weeks. Can NC State win their way into the ACC tournament in 2025?
Can they? Yes. Will they? Probably not. And here's part of the problem. We know the very bottom teams are almost certainly going to be Miami and Boston College, so they will not make the ACC tournament. For those who forget, this is the first year with 18 ACC basketball programs. You can either invite all 18 and have the format a certain way, or you can just chop the bottom 3 from the standings and have 15 teams invited the way it's been, during the time that the ACC was a 15-team league. Obviously, they chose that latter option, so the bottom 3 are not even going to be in Charlotte. It's the first time in the history of the 70-plus-year-old ACC that you're just not invited to the ACC tournament because of how low you finish in the standings. So we know 2 of the 3 pretty confidently, and there's a good chance the Wolfpack will be the 3rd, which will be weird given that the event is in Charlotte and the Wolfpack Nation tends to travel about as well as anyone. So we'll see how that shakes out if it comes to that with our coverage from Charlotte for everybody here on the North Carolina Sports Network. But here's part of the problem, Mike. Cal is one of the teams that might slide down the ladder, but Cal beat the Wolfpack head-to-head twice this year. So if it ended up being a tie, the Wolfpack would lose that tiebreaker. This Wednesday's game at Syracuse might be the Wolfpack's best chance to get out of the bottom 3, because the Orange are another candidate for the Wolfpack to catch up to. And obviously, if you beat Syracuse at Syracuse and you end up tied in the conference standings, you would get the tiebreaker, and it would be the Wolfpack getting invited to Charlotte instead of the Orange. But they better win that Syracuse game, because the other roads to avoid the embarrassment of going from ACC champion Final Four trip to bottom 3 in the ACC and not even invited to the ACC tournament, I think that Syracuse road is the most direct path for the Wolfpack to get there. Quick reminder, in a year where the ACC's home teams have been winning at a pretty high rate, 3 of these last 4 Wolfpack games are on the road, at Syracuse, at Georgia Tech, at Miami. The other game is Pitt. That one is in Raleigh. But I don't like the Wolfpack's chances. I was impressed by what they did to beat Wake Forest recently. Obviously, the Paul McNeil angle was among the highlights there. But I don't think they're going to catch, those middle of the pack teams like Florida State and Georgia Tech and Virginia Tech. So it's going to have to be somebody in that mix of Notre Dame, Virginia, California, Syracuse. And again, some of those tiebreakers, if it comes to a tie, already we know will go against the Wolfpack.
Not the position you want to be in when you're looking back on what could have been. 1-6 for the Wolfpack in games that have decided by 2 possessions or less. And then you look at your record and say, okay, 4-12 could be 10-6, right? Well, if and buts and candy and nuts, right? We all know what the sayings are. And this is a horseshoes and hand grenades team. As David said, the unfortunate part is 3 of the 4 left on the road. Sometimes that can be actually a good thing. Sometimes, from a coach's perspective, you remove all the distractions that can occur at home. The ticket request, your girlfriend's being on the court in the stands, whatever it may be. Hopefully, if you're Kevin Keats, you can try to rally something, because there's no end in sight if you're not playing in Charlotte. And I think nowadays what's even more daunting and on the coach's mind, and we talked in the opener about how Hubert Davis has been somewhat relieved to know he's going to have someone else in place to help him adjudicate this, is that transfer portal opens up in March now. And it's going to be a topic of discussion ad nauseum for all of the coaches. Once the portal gets filled with 1,000 or so players, is, well, I can't take care of this if I'm coaching my team. And the most noise you'll hear are from teams almost in state's position. Are they playing in a conference tournament or not? Did they make the NCAA tournament or not? Are they playing in the NIT or not? Are they going to go Crown in Vegas? Are they going to play in the CBI? You'll have a lot of teams kind of on that threshold trying to save themselves from the portal by not playing, which is counterintuitive to really what you want to be doing with the kids coming back. Although nowadays there's nothing stopping a kid from going into the portal while he's still playing. It's really a daunting task for these coaches. And again, can't emphasize it enough, why you need to have a team within the team that's working towards keeping your roster intact, whether it's financial, whether it's eligibility-wise, or whether it's evaluating the portal to know who fits your roster moving into the future. These are the things that are probably weighing on state staff mind right now, is although you want to win as many games as you can, coaches are always going to be competitive, players are going to want to win. Getting into the ACC tournament may have more ramifications for state than the opposite, because now all of a sudden you're not in the ACC tournament, and idle time is the devil's playground, correct? And now all of a sudden that playground becomes the portal. And is this a case where, you're highlighting one of your freshmen now that you just started that led you to a win, and he's got the attention of about 30 other schools right now that he didn't have the attention of before, because these guys are so lazy and they're just looking at the results. You just posted a result that could have an adverse effect. It becomes very, very difficult to manage as it is enough to try to win the game. Then what's your roster going to look like potentially even at the end of March before you even make it to the Final Four and figure out with the other coaches what's going on. It's not the best time to be a coach if you're not in that upper echelon and you know exactly what's happening and what you have coming, but it's something that's going to be a challenge for Kevin Keats and staff. The first and foremost thing they have to do is win the next one to figure out where they're at and see if they can avoid that last 3, because as we found out last year, you can't win it unless you're in it. Can they replicate that magic? As David said, I tend to agree with him that they probably can't, given that the top half of the ACC or just the very top of the ACC. But there are some other streaks that can happen when you're on the bottom of the ACC right now. It's a very weak league. There's of the 5 power basketball leagues, if you will, and I'll count the Big East in this still, only the Big Ten has 8 teams with winning records and more with losing records. Usually you want to have at least a 500 or better record for almost half, if not more, of your league. The ACC has 7 teams like that and 11 with losing records. And I know a couple of guys in the media got caught with the whole every league goes 500. But yes, there can be in a situation where more than half your teams have losing records because you're not going to play a fully balanced schedule and play every team twice. The Big 12 is 8-8 with that right now. The SEC is 9-7. The Big East is 6-5. We talked about the Big 10, 8-10 and close, but the ACC is clearly in the wrong direction on that. 7 teams 500 or better, 11 teams under 500. Why do I bring that up? Because there's a lot more opportunity, a lot less teams that show that task at hand to be beatable on the bottom half if you're NC State. You could string together a game or two against lesser opponents in those out brackets before you get to those byes that are waiting for you. And as we learned, winning 4 games in 4 days is not as daunting if you've won the first 2 and gained some momentum. Can it happen? Yes. Likely to happen? No. But given the structure of the ACC, this year, you may find it even more opportunistic for those bottom half teams to make that run because there's not as much resistance at the bottom as there has been in the past.
As David said, the ACC now at 18 teams. Back in the fall, it was Florida State Seminoles and head coach Mike Norvell that went from the penthouse to the outhouse from last year until this year. NC State's Kevin Cates trying to avoid that same fate a year after winning the ACC championship in Washington, D.C., and making it to the Final Four. NC State needs to go on a run. Can they do it? Only time will tell. Let's move ahead now to our weekly look ahead to Tobacco Road basketball. It's brought to you by our friends at Excel Moving and Storage, one of our charter partners here on the North Carolina Sports Network. And Kerry Keating, what are you excited about with this week ahead in ACC basketball?
I'm excited to see if Carolina and Wake continue this to give themselves a real chance. I mean, obviously, they're starting to figure some things out. We talked about the freshmen that have impacts on rosters. And can Elliot Cadeau translate into winning basketball for Carolina? You know, the portal opening up, Hubert wants to have a GM in place. Will that happen before the end of the season so he's not distracted by the portal as his team fights for an NCAA berth? But as David mentioned, this is not a team that's lacking talent. It's just a matter of they can get cohesive and get connected. Can RJ make a step? I think that's the biggest thing right now. If it was a distraction to RJ for whatever reason, here's a guy that's put a lot of points on the board, albeit I got an extra year to play and played more time than his counterparts before him. But you still have to put the ball in the basket. RJ is capable of having 30-point games. When and if that game comes, if it happens before the Duke game, what a better way to go out if he leads them to a win over Duke in his last game in the Dean Dome, and if it happens to be one of those 30-point outbursts. I'm looking to see if RJ can get himself righted, and maybe at the heels of Elliott kind of lessening his turnovers, giving RJ more opportunity to score. You have to score points to win. Obviously, defense does with championships. But in the case of RJ Davis, I want to see if he can kind of elevate his way and his ability to score in these last 4 games, because they're going to need that going into the postseason if they have any chance to make a run at all.
Yeah, Mike, the 3 ACC schools that I'll be watching most closely this week are Carolina, SMU, and Pittsburgh, all on or near the bubble. I'll tell you in a second why I'll be looking at those 3 specifically. But a quick point about our coverage here at the North Carolina Sports Network, also including a lot of teams that play in leagues where this week is their last week of the regular season. We all know these ACC schools we follow go all the way through March 8th, including, for example, that Duke trip to North Carolina. Some of the schools we cover, this is the end of the regular season road, maybe a couple games this week. And I circle that because all of these guys have been guests on our show, and I hope some of our show's mojo is helping to contribute to their success. But Takeo Siddle, UNC Wilmington, they have a chance to win a Coastal Athletic Association regular season title. They're probably looking up too much to make that happen, but they're certainly going to be one of the contenders come the CAA tournament. Mike Jones of UNC Greensboro is a guest this week on the David Glenn Show. We all know the Spartans were really good when Wes Miller was running that program. Now it's Cincinnati. Mike Jones has picked up the baton, and those Spartans are really good and have a great chance at either a regular season title in the Southern Conference or, who knows, maybe a SoCon tournament win, and that would, of course, be an automatic trip to the NCAA tournament as well. The 2 best teams in the Big South are also in our backyard. Our guest, Alan Huss and High Point, probably going to win another regular season title in that league, the favorite when their tournament rolls around. And our buddy Mike Morrell, UNC Asheville, also a recent guest of ours. The Bulldogs are really, really good again. So that league's down the stretch and tournament will be extra fun for those of us across Tobacco Road because, again, the Bulldogs and the Panthers of High Point are the two best teams in that league. So we're going to have champions in the great state of North Carolina in college basketball, even beyond the obvious Duke Blue Devils, who are going to have a regular season ACC title and probably more than that before we're all done. But this quick look ahead, Carolina's at Florida State. Virtually as the three of us are together for this conversation. Remember, the goal was for Carolina to go 6-0 against lesser opponents prior to hosting Duke, which we all know is a much bigger challenge. Well, the Heels, to their credit, they're 3-0 in that 6-0 run. We said at the beginning of these 6 games, the hardest is a trip to Florida State. It's one thing to beat the Wolfpack at the Smith Center or UVA in Chapel Hill. It's another thing to go to Tallahassee and play a Florida State team that's more in the middle of the standings rather than the bottom. They have been, by the way, these two teams, FSU and Carolina, have been the 2 fastest tempo teams in the entire Atlantic Coast Conference this season. So it should be a track meet in that Monday night matchup. Also, this is the next to last home game in the 27-year tenure of Leonard Hamilton as the head coach of the Seminoles. His next to last home game there in Tallahassee. So you know that FSU's players, FSU's fans, they are going to treat UNC's visit like the Super Bowl, regardless of the Tar Heels' more mediocre than usual record. I'll be looking at SMU this week. They take the West Coast trip. The Mustangs are at Cal on Wednesday, at a pretty good Stanford team on Saturday. Because the Mustangs lost to Clemson at home last week, they still have the sort of resume that almost never makes the NCAA tournament. I know they're in the field in some of these bracketologists' projections. I don't believe you're going to get in if your best victories are over Pitt and Stanford, which is what SMU has right now. Beating NIT teams is not going to get you in. You need something better than that. If SMU sweeps these 2 West Coast trips in this new ACC schedule, beat the Bears, beat the Cardinal, they remain on the bubble. If you lose both, it's going to be sending a message to the selection committee that you just don't deserve an at-large bid this season. So huge week for the Mustangs. Finally, the Pitt Panthers, man, they're really hurting, but they're not dead yet. Pitt goes to Louisville on Saturday. The Panthers have lost 9 of their last 13 games, so they've slid basically off the NCAA tournament bubble. But they did beat Ohio State. They did beat West Virginia earlier this season. A win at Louisville obviously would be another big resume builder for Jeff Capel and the Panthers if they can get it. Easier said than done. But it is the Panthers' last chance for a high impact before the ACC, high impact win before the ACC tournament. You know, just like Carolina has that Duke game, Wake has a Duke game, and SMU whiffed on its chance to beat Clemson. So all these bubble teams are running out of opportunities for important resume builders. Pitt has a chance at a big one at Louisville on Saturday.
This has been Time Out on the North Carolina Sports Network. Be sure to look at our website and check out the great David Glenn exclusive content at ncsportsnetwork.com and to follow us on social media at the NC Sports Net. A reminder that coming up on Selection Sunday, you need to go to ESPN.com and fill out your men's and women's brackets to be a part of our big NC Port contest, bacon and basketball. We also invite you to follow us here on the North Carolina Sports Network as we count down the road to Winston-Salem and the North Carolina High School Athletic Association Basketball Championships, March 14th and 15th at the Lawrence Joel Veterans Memorial Coliseum. For Kerry Keating and David Glenn, I'm Mike Waddell, thanking you for tuning in all across the Bold North State, the Tobacco Road Basketball Show.